There are some plays that are not very good. And the worst sections of those bad plays, can't you at least say the man from Stratford-upon-Avon? That's their argument in this book. What do they say about skeptics? Chapter 1. The unreadable Delia Bacon. Now that's an interesting first chapter, wouldn't you say? We're going to argue that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare by presenting an argument against someone who is unreadable. It's a very interesting position, isn't it? I think it's a winning argument, really, because I too find her unreadable. I personally am an anti-Stratfordian. I just believe let students hear both sides, or multiple sides. Don't tell them it's settled academic thought. Who decided that? Where's this academy that said, you must not study this? Look, it's a religion, let's face it. It's a religion. It's based on Stratford-upon-Avon. It's like going to the Vatican and saying Jesus is not God. But it needs to be stated that it's a religion. We believe in the faith of William Shakespeare of Stratford, and we will not listen to any arguments to the contrary. That's what has to be said, not that this is historical. My talk is called From Crackpot to Mainstream, the evolution of the Shakespeare Authorship Question, which turns out with recent events is a very topical subject. I'd like to begin with a couple of stories. A few years ago, my nephew in high school called me, and he had to write a composition for English class on Shakespeare. And he knew I'd done several Shakespeare shows, and he wanted an idea. So I thought about it, and I said, well, why don't you do something on Shakespeare's schooling, the man from Stratford's schooling? And I explained to him there's no evidence he ever attended any school, but biographers feel the need to give the greatest authors some education, so they simply presume he attended the school. Now clearly they can't state that he attended the school, even though the Stratford-upon-Avon website does state that he attended the school. They have to find creative ways of suggesting attendance without actually saying it. So go in and take down, at any library, take down all the biographies of Shakespeare and look for the word school, which you're going to find the first few pages, and just see how they qualify his attendance there, and then see what that suggests to you about scholarship and about education and whatever that suggests to you. So he went in and did exactly that. He took down 5 or 10 biographies. He found several very creative modifying phrases like the man from Stratford almost certainly attended the Stratford Grammar School, most likely attended, it's safe to believe, we can virtually be certain, and of course my favorite, the double negative, we have no reason not to assume he attended. And my nephew proceeded to write a very insightful composition, way beyond any high school level. In my view, it was a university level paper. And we were both very excited about it, figured he'd get a very good grade. He handed it in and called me a few days later, devastated. Not only had he not got a grade, his paper had been rejected. Oh. I said, well, that's unbelievable. What happened? He said, well, I went in to talk to the teacher, and the teacher said, I went on a trip to England and visited Stratford-upon-Avon. And I went to the actual school, and I got a tour of the school, and I went to the classroom where Shakespeare studied, and I saw the actual desk that Shakespeare studied at. Well, my nephew was puzzled and surprised. I said, well, no, but that's impossible because we know very little about our most famous playwright. We know absolutely nothing about the first 18 years of his life, so no one could possibly say what school he went to, and they certainly have no idea what desk he ever sat at. Unfortunately, as usually happens in these cases, his argument was fell on deaf ears, and he was told to write another composition dealing with historical fact. About 10 years ago, actually 11 years ago, I debuted my performance of Mark Twain's Is Shakespeare Dead, which is available on YouTube free of charge, and please send the links to anyone. And I performed it here in 2003 at the Fringe Festival. And it went over extremely well. What's extraordinary, what's fun for me as a performer is so few people know the argument, that when you present the argument, they're flabbergasted. And very few people argue, actually. It's quite astounding because they're just, wow, I had no idea. Well, this gentleman came up to me, a young man who had a similar type story. He said in high school he had heard there was a rumor, or whatever you want to call it, that Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare, and he brought it up in English class, and the teacher said, no, we don't discuss that. He didn't like this, and he proceeded to say, no, I heard there's a rumor that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. Well, he was sent to the principal's office. And I said, well, what happened to the principal's office? Well, the principal was very upset. He said, stop disrupting the class and keep your conspiracy theories to yourself. Another story. I like to Google my name. My wife thinks this is funny. But I'm the only Keir Cutler. And there is a Jack Cutler Keir, believe it or not, which you can find through Google. But if I Google Keir Cutler, anything that comes up relates to me. And I do this from time to time because I've performed right across Canada at virtually every major city, and I've performed thanks to Earl and Bonner in Houston and Oregon, and I've also performed in New York a number of times, and I was in Orlando performing just this year. So if I Google my name, very often things come up. People refer to plays or seeing me, or might relate some play to something they see me do. And I did this earlier, and a video computer gaming site came up with my name. So this is pretty surprising. I wonder what this is. So I clicked onto it, and this was a site where they discussed the latest, Grand Theft Auto or whatever it's come out. But you can discuss anything you want. Someone had seen Is Shakespeare Dead on YouTube and asked the question of all the video gamers, did you ever hear that Shakespeare might not have written Shakespeare? And I saw this video last night. They left a link, and they said, I find it interesting. I don't know if it's true. And all the gamers, or many of the gamers, logged on and said things like, of course Shakespeare bloody wrote Shakespeare. And some people actually knew quite a bit, said, I love Mark Twain, but it's so tragic that he believed that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. Well, no one was defending my side, so I created a profile in my own name and logged on and tried to at least present the other side of the argument on some extent. And I was showered with insults. It was incredible. I was an idiot, a crackpot, a nutcase, and someone logged on and said, you believe the moon landing was faked, don't you? This is a serious question. I want an answer. Earlier this year, a wonderful book came out by John Shahan and Alexander Waugh. I know John well, and I bought it on Amazon, the digital version. And when I logged on to buy it, I noticed someone had left a 1-star review. It was 1 star. 1 star is like, there's no value to this book at all. So, and the review was quite extensive. I counted 700 words. So I read the review, and it wasn't about the book. It was about the movie Anonymous. And then I saw there were comments, and people had commented on his review and said, the book is not about the movie Anonymous. Obviously you haven't read the book. And this person had given a 1-star review, again logged on, and answered in uppercase, of course I haven't read the book. In April last year, I had the wonderful opportunity of attending a conference at York University that Don Rubin was having on the authorship question. And I met many of the students who loved the course, whether they ended up believing Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare or not. They loved and enjoyed the course. And I've talked to some today who are in the course right now and love it. And we had a discussion with several people. We actually had something approaching a debate in the sense there were some Stratfordians there. There was actually, David Prosser was there from the Stratford Festival. And we were having a discussion on stage with the students. And David Prosser pointed out and said, well, if we should discuss whether Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, maybe we should also discuss Holocaust denial. A hush came over the room. I was sitting beside Mark Anderson. Mark was, well, like most of us, instantly furious. And Mark turned to me and said, I can't let this pass. Keir, I got to say, you know, Mark is one of the nicest guys on earth, but he was not able to let this go. So he said, I've got to say something. So he interrupted and said, I'd just like to point out, we're discussing a literary issue. We're not killing 6 million people. Now, these are 4 stories, and they all have the same motivation, really. They're all based on the idea that the man from Stratford, if he didn't write Shakespeare, that's a conspiracy theory. And all conspiracy theories are basically alike. So if you don't believe Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, you don't believe the Holocaust happened, and so on and so on. And most of the people in this room have been subjected to this. And it's a very bizarre concept when you think about it. Doubting Shakespeare is a conspiracy theory, and all conspiracy theories are false. Therefore, we can accuse anyone who doesn't believe Shakespeare of any conspiracy, and that they also believe. Crackpot, that's basically the idea. All crackpot theory, all conspiracy theories are crackpot theories. Wells and Edmondson of the Shakespeare Birth Trust, of course, agree with this point of view. That is their main argument. I give a quote from them. This is the Shakespeare Birth Trust speaking. The Shakespeare authorship conspiracy theory is an entirely parasitic phenomenon, attacking the truth to feed off its lifeblood. Like all conspiracy theories, it has no independent life of its own and instead attaches itself leech-like to a healthy body. Seriously? Yeah. That's their position. I mean, this is their official position. So all conspiracy theories, and I thought about that, but I said, well, wait a second. Julius Caesar was murdered by a conspiracy. I mean, wasn't that if you had gone up to Julius Caesar and said, you know, there's a bunch of senators about to murder you, that would have been conspiracy theory. Where did this come from, this idea that any conspiracy theory, they're all alike, and you just accuse them blanketly? Well, when I have a problem like this, I go where I normally go to find out the answers, Wikipedia. And they had the answer. It's very interesting. Conspiracy theory, definition. Originally, a neutral term. However, in the mid-1960s, it became derogatory. A conspiracy theory now implies a paranoid tendency to see influence of some malign covert agency in the events. The term is used to automatically dismiss claims that the critic deems ridiculous, misconceived, paranoid, unfounded, outlandish, or irrational. On the other hand, a conspiracy theory that's proven to be correct, like President Richard Nixon and his aides conspired to cover up Watergate, once it's proven to be true, it ceases to be a conspiracy theory, it becomes historical fact. Interesting. Now, we all know a conspiracy theory about a very famous man who lived hundreds of years ago. It involves a man who wrote some of the most important documents of all time. It's a man whose home is visited every year by hundreds of thousands of people. His works are worshipped. In fact, the man himself is worshipped. Now I'm speaking, of course, of Thomas Jefferson. Now there was an absolutely appalling conspiracy theory about Thomas Jefferson. It sickens me to even mention it because there are Americans in the room and I apologize. This is the man, if you don't know Thomas Jefferson, he actually wrote the words, "All men are created equal." Now some crackpot psycho, about 180 years ago, maybe 200 now, came up with this, obviously wanted to disparage him, and came up with this theory that Thomas Jefferson, well in his mid-40s, had sex with a 14-year-old slave girl and fathered children with her. Now, this was outrageous, and anyone who suggested it for 180 years was called a crackpot, until along came DNA. And the conspiracy theory became historical fact. Now, there's a lot of parallels here between Thomas Jefferson and William Shakespeare, because if you want to have a real fun time, go on the internet and Google Thomas Jefferson and read the various opinions. And don't forget to read the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, the official keepers of Thomas Jefferson's Virginia home. They have a very interesting way of presenting, which is now considered historical fact. Now, the point I'm making here is that DNA basically proves something that we'd all like to prove about Shakespeare. And is there a DNA that we can find that's going to suddenly, people are going to suddenly say, instead of going online and saying there's no evidence whatsoever Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare, and oh, I love this one, it's a settled academic fact. I'm an academician, I have a PhD, it's not settled for me. So who is it that decides it's settled? I'm not sure about that. I would contend that the DNA has already been found. I would contend that the people in this room are holding the DNA. I'll give you some examples. The Declaration of Reasonable Doubt about the identity of William Shakespeare is a very powerful document, and people are signing on all the time. This is growing and will continue to grow, and I want to thank John for his incredible work on that. It's bravo. It's a wonderfully put up document, particularly because it explains why people think the man from Stratford did write Shakespeare, and then explains why he didn't. Something that Stratfordians don't understand about scholarship. For some reason, our side seems to understand what scholarship is. And some of the people in this room, like Earl Showerman, who's a fantastic resource person on the medical side. Now, the medical side is almost always ignored because they can't connect it to that damn grammar school. It's really a problem. And you know, they can say, as Michael pointed out yesterday, you can always contend that if he attended grammar school, he really got a PhD there. You can always exaggerate it. And you can say, well, if he memorized some Latin, then he knew all Latin texts. But you can't pretend he became a medical doctor there. So they always ignore it. Don't they always ignore the medical side? And the fact is, there's more medical references, in my understanding, in Shakespeare than there are legal ones, and there are hundreds and hundreds of legal ones. And Tom's pointed that out fantastically. Bonner Cutting has looked at the will. The will is such a devastating document. Go up to someone and say, do you know he wrote a will that he dictated to a lawyer, and it's over 3 pages long, and he never once mentions he was a writer? Then don't you think that suggests reasonable doubt? Don't you think that maybe somehow this guy that wrote 900,000 words in his plays and poems might have mentioned something? Maybe a play that he hadn't published or hadn't given to anyone, or a poem or something. Doesn't that suggest reasonable doubt? Isn't that DNA right there? It is for me. And of course, Professor Rubin and Sky are doing great work at universities. Imagine a university being attacked. And one of the students here said to me, he said, we're being attacked because we're studying the subject. He said, I wonder if I suggested I wanted to study the ancient city of Atlantis. Would they say, no, Atlantis didn't exist, you can't study it? It's a great point. It's such an amazing thing that every university is supposedly dedicated to open thought, to critical thinking, to showing both sides. They say it in their mission statement. They sign a document, the Association of American Universities and Colleges, they all sign a document that they're absolutely dedicated to showing both sides of an argument. So the only way they cannot show the anti-Stratfordian side is to say, there is no argument. It's settled thought. And yet there's no plays, no poems, no diaries, no letters, a 3-page will that never mentions his name, and it's beyond doubt that he wrote the works. It's a fascinating, almost disturbing mental thing. I mean, Earl was telling me, which was fascinating, about the mental state of Merchant of Venice last night, which I found. I thought that was a credible performance because I believed it. I believed that this merchant really would have cut the pound of flesh out, which I didn't think was possible. But the reason he did it is I think he understood what Earl was pointing out, is that the repetition, my bond, this, I can't deal with life, I've lost my daughter, I have to get something back for it. And that's what made it real. And that's what we're about here, is making it real and looking at the evidence. I personally am an anti-Stratfordian. I just believe let students hear both sides, or multiple sides. Don't tell them it's settled academic thought. Who decided that? Where's this academy that said, you must not study this? And anything you say don't study means you should study it. Also the film we saw yesterday, Klaus Redenbach, I think he did an incredible job. I was honored to be part of it. And if you listen to the statements of Mark Rylance, who's just a giant, I mean, one of the great actors on the planet, and to just simply say, as he does at the end of the movie, I've learned so much about Shakespeare and about that world by studying this. Is that wrong? That's wrong for students to learn so much. Critical thinking is wrong. Two key books that, I mean, of many, there's many books that I'm going to mention two because these are phenomenally important to me. Shakespeare's Guide to Italy by Richard Rowe. Now the reason I think that's incredibly important is because Stratfordians have said for forever that the man from Stratford never left England. He never went to Italy. And guess what happened, which Richard Rowe found out? Nobody ever went to Italy to find out if he did. Now think about that for a second. Can anyone guess how many dissertations have been written on William Shakespeare? 10,000? 100,000? 14 of the plays are either set or with scenes in that country, and not one of them said, I'll go to Italy and see if there's anything there. What kind of academic thought is that? Who said, no, we've decided he didn't go to Italy, so no one must go there. And Richard Rowe was not a Shakespearean scholar as such. And it took him to go there and spend 20 years and go, wait a second, this is where this play is set. He knows information, the famous sycamore trees, but on and on and on. But yet they're still going. On that video game website, I was said, why did Shakespeare make so many mistakes about Italy if he wasn't a dumb guy from the provinces? Well, he did make mistakes about Italy, but the propaganda is out there. The propaganda is just spread and spread and spread. So that book is really important, obviously, in this. That's because there are scholars that are now admitting, yeah, he must have found a way to go to Italy. There are some Stratfordians that are actually begrudgingly admitting that because this book just devastates them. And the other book is Diana Price's work on Shakespeare's unorthodox biography, which is absolutely devastating in the Stratfordian case. This quote, I always post it whenever this comes up. If Shakespeare was the writer the title pages proclaim him to be, then there should be evidence of his literary career. He is the only alleged writer of any consequence from the time period who left behind no personal evidence of his career as a professional writer. His biographers must rely instead on posthumous, ambiguous, impersonal, and non-literary evidence to make their case. And yet the other Stratfordian side says it's beyond doubt. He's the only one. She looked at 25 well-known authors from the period, and nothing was Shakespeare. Now, I'm not saying that proves it, but it does suggest that maybe we should have it open to discussion. Maybe the academic position shouldn't be, you must not study this. And if any university, including Guelph and York, decide to study it, we will condemn them in the press. How dare they? Are they trying to promote critical thinking? We've decided for them. No. Anyway, so that brings me to the ultimate DNA. This book. Now, Michael Egan ridiculed it yesterday. And what amazed me is that the chapter he picked out to ridicule was, in my opinion, the best chapter in the book. Yeah, you were being kind. Now, I had the same reaction when I looked at the cover. I mean, really? Shakespeare in Love. That movie has about a 5-minute conversation between William Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth I, which never happened, was completely invented. it portrays the master of the rebels as a buffoon who had no power, basically. He's laughed at, even though he was known to be could imprison and torture writers and did. It talks about a Virginia plantation before Virginia even existed. The writer himself, Tom Stoppard, when asked about these things, said, "I'm writing entertainment. This is not a history lesson." And they put that on the cover. There's a scene in it where Shakespeare, played by Joseph Fiennes, crumples up some parchment and throws it in a souvenir mug written, "A gift from Stratford-upon-Avon." This is on the cover. Okay, now I thought about this a long time because I said, well, wait, the title is Shakespeare Beyond Doubt, Evidence, Argument, and Controversy. It doesn't say, like, you know, mockery of the Stratfordian position. The only thing I can come up with is it's the publishers that demanded that this be on there, and the academics said under no circumstances, but the publishers won out in the end. That's the only thing I can figure. So, first thing I did look at this book is because I believe so strongly in Diana Price and Richard Roe's work, and I was convinced by it, I wanted to see how they deal with it. Because if they're going to present it beyond doubt, they have an argument. Maybe they can say, well, the Italy thing is nonsense, and what Diana Price says is nonsense. Maybe they have an argument, and maybe they'll convince me. So I immediately went to the index. I wanted to read those parts. I was just too anxious. So I looked up Diana Price. Obviously, I figured she'd have a chapter, but I just looked in the index, and I went quickly through, let's see, where to find P. Here's, okay, Plutarch, Pope, Porter, Putnam. Well, I must have put it under Diana. So I looked up their D, and I found Defoe, Decker, Derbyite, Dickens, Diggs, Donnelly, Doran, Duff. They put him on the cover, and they don't ever mention Diana Price. But Diana Price is one of the major scholars, if not the major scholar of the argument. And these are scholars writing about a scholarly subject. Well, maybe they have something on Richard Roe. Well, needless to say, Richard Roe's not in this book. So this was perplexing. I mean, what exactly is in this book? So I went to the introduction, and I found this. This is in the first few hundred words of the book. Throughout this book, we use the term anti-Shakespearean to describe those who propagate any theory that disputes Shakespeare's authorship. Any theory is anti-Shakespearean. And the last sentence of the introduction is, we will shine a Shakespearean light on an all too long established heresy. So the book fails to mention the two biggest scholars in the subject, but insults those that believe the other side and calls them anti-Shakespearean heretics in the introduction before they've mentioned any proof. Part 1, skeptics. So wait a second, this is about Shakespeare Beyond Doubt, but we're going to have part 1 about skeptics. What do they say about skeptics? Chapter 1. The unreadable Delia Bacon. Now that's an interesting first chapter, wouldn't you say? We're going to argue that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare by presenting an argument against someone who is unreadable. It's a very interesting position. I think it's a winning argument, really, because I too find her unreadable. So I decided, well, when do they actually get to this beyond doubt part? So I flipped ahead to part 2. Okay, Shakespeare as author. This is going to have it. Oh no. The first chapter of Shakespeare as author is called Theorizing Shakespeare's Authorship. Theorizing. Didn't they tell the guy, it's called Beyond Doubt, we're not theorizing. That's what we're saying they're doing. We have to get our sides correct here. We say they have a theory, not them. And this is just a wonderful Wonderful chapter, and thank you, Michael, for leaving it free to me. I don't know how you resisted it, because the jewels in this one are just beyond. Now, this is the first chapter in their argument. This is assumedly their strongest case. Let's see what's in here. Well, they start off with something interesting. Even a superficial trawl through the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography will reveal how little we know about many important figures, making the gaps in the biographical records of Shakespeare seem typical rather than unusual, and therefore in no need of explanation. Now, this is an interesting argument that Hatfield has come out and perhaps explains why he's the first one, because I had not realized that this was now this is their official argument. The Shakespeare Birth Trust is involved in this book. Stanley Wells is the executive director, or the whatever they call him now, and he's one of the editors of this book. Quote, this is Andrew Hatfield, the first chapter in Shakespeare as Author. No one, I think, disputes that Shakespeare collaborated with other writers. The list would include, at a conservative estimate, John Fletcher, Thomas Middleton, Thomas Nash, George Peele, George Wilkins, and some others. That's an interesting argument. Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare except all these other authors. What kind of an argument is that? Oh, now this is the crux of his point, because it's a little baffling. Why would you, if you're going to argue that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, you can't start out and say, well, he did, but there's 5 other authors involved. We may find, quote, we may find that some passages, even some widely beloved sections of plays or favorite lines, were not Shakespeare's work. Now think about that. We may find, to be or not to be, by Shakespeare. No, he didn't write that. Oh, that balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet? No, I think it was George Wilkins that wrote it. I tried to come up with a name for this argument. I think it's the scorched earth argument by Shakespeare. We will accept to burn off all the best parts. As he says, the favorite lines, I don't care. A horse, my king horse, not by Shakespeare. We will throw all these lines out. We'll give them to anyone you say. Your favorite passages, those great scenes in Richard III, not by the man from Stratford. We never said that. We proved it someone else. There are some plays that are not very good. And the worst sections of those bad plays, can't you at least say the man from Stratford wrote that? That's their argument in this book. They call it theorizing Shakespeare. How did you leave this up, Michael? Oh my God. All right, so let's turn to something more interesting. That being their argument, David Kathman makes a very interesting point, and it's been brought up, I think, by others here. Anti-Shakespeareans, which they've called us, are driven by an irrational hatred of William Shakespeare of Stratford and all he represents. Now, we're driven by an irrational hatred, but these scholars, who come from these major universities, don't know that the first step in scholarship is to present your opponent's arguments, not pretend they don't exist. And also, there are 2 forms of argument that are unacceptable in any dissertation. One is ad hominem attacks, and number 2 is name-calling. They've already called us anti-Shakespearean heretics, and now they're saying, ad hominemly, we have an irrational hatred for Shakespeare. Isn't that fascinating? That's the argument in this book. Now, what amazes me, as Michael made this point, didn't any of the editors read this? Are they aware you cannot say to your opponent, you know why you don't believe what I believe? Because you have an irrational hatred of my belief. That's not an argument. That cannot be in this book, just as this picture cannot be on the cover. How did this happen? Is this really what we're up against?
Yes.
And I'm looking for DNA? Just read this book. Oh, this is a wonderful chapter. They have a chapter on some of us in this, most of us in this room, I guess, maybe all of us, the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt. Now that's interesting. They're going to put up an argument. They're going to explain what the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt is, and then knock it down. They're not going to do that. That's scholarship. They don't work that way. It says on the first thing, if let's see, how does he write this? My purpose here is to consider the Declaration and its aims. I will therefore not do a point-by-point rebuttal. Interesting. Now, one of the things that amazed me here is, this is in our Declaration of Reasonable Doubt. It's talking about doubt. We talk about reasonable doubt. This explains what we're thinking. Doubt is always possible. Quote, some philosophers doubt that we exist. Many philosophy students have been baffled by teachers pointing earnestly at a table and demanding they prove it exists. Or there's an elephant. There is or is not an elephant in the room. Or that you're not reading this at all. Or you're dreaming it. Few legal cases have been settled by recourse to radical existential doubt. So they are equating saying this podium does not exist to saying something that happened 400 years ago, of which there are no plays, no poems, no letters, no diaries. His will doesn't say he was a writer. And as Diana Price pointed out, the only alleged writer of the period that left no evidence of being a writer, they're saying this table doesn't exist is the same kind of doubt. This hand doesn't exist, then Shakespeare doesn't exist. That's in this book. That's explanation. There's no explanation of our declaration. None. Now, one of the most bizarre things is they don't mention Diana Price or Richard Rowe or many of the others we know. But I'm mentioned. I'm mentioned in the book. Wow, what do they say about me? A video posted on the Declaration's website is presented by actor Keir Cutler, PhD. Okay. What's the video about? Now, if you're going to refer to a video, wouldn't you say what it's about? Maybe a sentence? No! You know why? Because I say in the video, no one in university, I went to 12 years to get a PhD in 4 different universities. No one ever told me there are no plays, no poems, no letters, no diaries in William Shakespeare of Stratford's own hand. And when I found out, years later, that that was the case, that infuriated me. Because I would have liked to have had that information. I would think that a Stratfordian, the most dedicated Stratfordian, should at least open all of his lectures is, I believe the man from Stratford wrote the works, but I have to also confess there are no plays, no poems, no letters, no diaries in his own hand, and his will doesn't mention he's a writer. Otherwise, it's not scholarship, it's propaganda. The DNA is right here. It's not this book, it's in all of our work. We can be very proud of what we're doing, and we can be so ashamed of the universities that are propagating this nonsense. They might as well be saying the movie Shakespeare in Love is fact, and that's all you need to know about Shakespeare. Thank you very much.
Got time for 2 questions.
Yes?
Last night on our way to the second Stratford in Ontario, here, we came up with a realization of how to mollify and soothe the Stratfordians. You might wish to weave it into your show. We're going to find Oxfordians Anonymous. And we're going to ask Stratfordians
The council.
to offer themselves as our sponsors.
Yes, yes, yeah. Hello, my name is Keir Cutler. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think that counseling is badly needed. I think Don Rubin, I'm sorry, you're going to have to be the first to get the counseling. You know, I mean,
You see, also you have to realize that one of the very earliest Oxfordians clearly was himself in very great need of psychotherapy.
absolutely.
And this was Sigmund Freud.
Exactly. And Looney. Let's call him by his real name, Looney.
As a student, I've taken both a Shakespeare course and then also the authorship course with Don. And one of the things I found interesting was my Shakespeare course, the first lecture we did was about Shakespeare's life. And we talked about he was born to John Shakespeare, he was born William Shakespeare on the 23rd of April. And I took it all as fact. I mean, that's all I knew about Shakespeare at the time. And then when I started to look into it, I realized that it was actually Shakespeare. And when I questioned her, my professor told me that it's irrelevant. And every time I brought up any point in regards to the authorship question, as I looked into it, I was told it was irrelevant and irrelevant. And I emailed with her, and it was irrelevant. And she never wanted to address any of the questions I had because she said it was irrelevant and that there was no question. And I just wanted to say that thank you for pointing it out clearly to all of us that there's an issue there.
And his teacher was one of the teachers quoted in the Globe and Mail article that this conference is irrelevant.
Irrelevant, synonymous.
Yes.
Would you comment upon the manner in which the discussion takes place in the rebuttal book?
Yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, these are the people from the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, and of course, we've got Earl's chapter, it's a very powerful document. The problem is that it's verboten to look at it for anyone that believes the Stratfordian thing. That's the problem. That's why it's all out there. There's lots of great books that demonstrate it. I mean, myself, when I started reading, there were no letters. I said, wait, he wrote 900,000 words? And not one letter survived. Now, that doesn't prove anything, but to me it said, whoa, there's a doubt here. And then when I found that they put on Richard II to foment a rebellion, and the man supposedly had written it was never even questioned, that's doubt. It doesn't prove anything, but you go, wait, there's something not working here. And now that I've read Diana Price, and she's gone through it and said, no, it's all posthumous. It's all just hearsay. It's all, look, it's a religion, let's face it. It's a religion. It's based on Stratford-upon-Avon. It's like going to the Vatican and saying Jesus is not God. But it needs to be stated that it's a religion. We believe in the faith of William Shakespeare of Stratford, and we will not listen to any arguments to the contrary. That's what has to be said, not that this is historical. That's the problem. Yes? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to point out for anybody that doesn't know that Keir has an e-book. I forgot the name from the Crackpot.
Yes.
I am a crackpot, and
Shakespeare Authorship Question, a Crackpot's View, where I explain.
But I was, that's where you have your diatribe on, universities and
Exactly.
where's critical thinking. Can you update that to put some of what?
Yes, I got it.
told?
Yes, this book and John's book need to be.
We accept your, it's great you do this in front of us, but this has to be heard by everybody.
Well, that's why we videotape it.
Thank you so much, Keir.